So here's the question. Would sin be forgiven for a child murderer or a paedophile? Surely this is pure evil.
I think everyone can agree this is pure evil. And so let's start with the end of the question. C.S. Lewis, the author of the Narnia Chronicles, he went on this journey from atheist to theist, meaning believing in God. He went from not believing in God to believing in God, and then to Christian. And the thing that turned him from not being a believer in God to believing in some kind of God was this idea of pure evil. And he said, well, what am I calling evil if there is not good? And if I want to call something pure evil, then surely I'm, by implication, saying that there's something that is capital G good. If there's a capital E evil, there's a capital G good. And they use the illustration of, if there's never been anything such thing as a straight line, then you could never call a line crooked either. Lines would just be like, if there was no such thing as a straight line, lines would just be lines. It would all just be a mess, and you wouldn't expect it to be anything other than a mess if there wasn't such a thing as a straight line. And if there wasn't such a thing as pure good, then we wouldn't expect anything else in the world, and we wouldn't call pure evil evil. It would just be the way things are, if there wasn't such a thing as pure good. That took him to a belief that there is a capital G good, there is God. Now, therefore, if we are looking at something like child murder and pedophilia, and we are calling it pure evil, we are saying there is something as something that is good. Could that good God forgive a perpetrator of such pure evil? And the Christian answer is, well, if God cannot forgive that evil, what hope do we have for the other evils that you and I perpetrate? And have I committed child murder or pedophilia? No. But by comparison with the capital G good God, do I also need forgiveness? Yeah, I 100% need forgiveness. I'm banking on forgiveness because I am crooked in my own way. Maybe not in this way, but in my own way, I am crooked and absolutely need forgiveness. And that's the other interesting thing about this question. Forgiveness does not imply that a sin is not so bad after all. And again, C.S. Lewis said this, forgiveness actually implies that the sin was so terrible, there was nothing else for it but for it to be forgiven. It could not be just. So can pedophilia be justified? Never. Right? Can child murder be justified? Can it be just forgotten? Right? Can it be accepted? Can child murder be accepted? Never. Can pedophilia be accepted? Never. Can it be forgiven? It must be forgiven because it's evil, right? Now, the question asks us to put ourselves into the, to imagine the person who is the child murderer or the pedophile somehow making some confession and saying, I'm sorry, God, and then getting, accepted into the pearly gates of heaven. And that is a difficult thing for all of us to kind of grasp hold of. But I would urge Anonymous to read another C.S. Lewis book called The Great Divorce, where he talks about this story of, it's a fictional story. This is not how C.S. Lewis thinks the afterlife works. But he says, imagine if a busload of ghosts from hell are taking a day trip to heaven, and the bright men of heaven are inviting them in and saying, please come. And he's got this conversation there. And there is someone who has not committed murder, who is the ghost from hell. And he is outraged that the murderer is in heaven and that he's been left in hell. And the bright man, the murderer, says, I don't know how it works, but just come. And then the ghost from hell says, I don't want anyone's bleeding charity. And the murderer who's been forgiven says, oh, then do ask for the bleeding charity. This is the only basis on which anyone is ever invited into heaven. And in the scene, the man from hell kind of curses the murderer and slinks off back down to where he came from. And it's a very psychologically believable scenario, actually, where the murderer has shown true contrition, and there has been something of a reconciliation, and it's in the hands of God, and you can sort of, even though in the abstract I can't picture the child murdering pedophile being transformed. C.S. Lewis does a great job of portraying how that might happen. He also does a great job of portraying how regular sinners like you and me can harden ourselves and justify ourselves so much that we turn our back on the bleeding mercy and the bleeding charity and curve ourselves in on ourselves. And so I don't have a great answer for this question. I think any sin can be forgiven. I really do. And I'm banking that every sin I've committed will be forgiven in Jesus. And the alternative is to think of a God who kind of has a certain bar that you've got to meet. Yeah. And I'm just not sure I could ever be sure that I've met that bar. So I'm glad that he sets the bar way down in the gutter and offers it for free.
And that it's by grace you have been saved. And just if it's by grace, then it can't be by works or failing to commit certain sins.